The Mercedes S-Class glided through Chicago's Michigan Avenue, its wipers fighting a losing battle against the late February blizzard. Inside, the temperature felt colder than the storm outside. Victoria Langford, CEO of Nordic Core Technologies, stabbed at her phone screen with mounting desperation. Her third translation agency had just experienced equipment failure, they claimed, though she suspected they'd found a higher-paying client. 87 minutes until the Tanabe-Rallo delegation landed at O'Hare International Airport. 87 minutes to salvage a $1.2 billion partnership that had taken 18 long months to carefully negotiate. The driver, some new hire from the executive car service, reached forward and lowered the jazz station's volume to help her concentrate, probably thought he was being helpful. "Keep your hands off my car," Victoria snapped, not looking up from her urgent phone calls. "And the music stays off. I need to think." Through the privacy glass, she saw his hand retreat slowly. Good. He was learning. She pulled up the Tanabe Industries contract on her tablet, scanning Clause 17 for the 100th time today. The liability language was dense, technical, and absolutely required someone who understood both Japanese corporate etiquette and Hindi contractual terminology. Hiroshi Tanabe's CFO, Annika Rallo, would be personally reviewing every word. Her assistant, Marcus, had warned her 3 weeks ago about relying on just one translation firm. She'd dismissed his concern. Riverside Languages had handled the Beijing expansion, the Seoul merger. They were reliable until they weren't. Victoria's reflection stared back from the window, 42 years old, ash blonde hair pulled into a severe knot. The kind of woman Bloomberg called brilliantly ruthless. She'd built Nordic Core from a failed university research project into a quantum computing powerhouse. She didn't accept failure. The driver adjusted his rearview mirror. "Eyes on the road," Victoria said. "Not on me." "Yes, ma'am." His voice was quiet, almost gentle. It irritated her more than defiance would have. She scrolled through her contacts. Every qualified interpreter in the Midwest was either booked solid or stranded by the storm. The blizzard had grounded half the flights into Chicago. The Tanabe-Rallo delegation was coming from Tokyo via a private jet with de-icing equipment, but her backup interpreters from New York weren't so fortunate. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. "Still nothing," he said. "Checked with Northwestern's language department. Their Japanese professor is in Kyoto." Victoria threw the phone onto the leather seat. Outside, Chicago had transformed into a snow globe. The Art Institute's lions wore white caps. Millennium Park was empty except for maintenance crews fighting to keep paths clear. The car slowed at a red light. In the front seat, the driver reached for something on the dashboard, probably his own phone. The presumption of it. "I don't pay for you to text your friends," Victoria said, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Know your place." She pressed the button that raised the privacy glass partition all the way, sealing herself in the back. Better. She couldn't think with someone hovering in her peripheral vision. What Victoria couldn't see was the way the driver's jaw tightened, or how his hand had been reaching, not for a phone, but for the climate control. The back vents were blowing cold air, and he'd noticed her shiver. Daniel Mercer, a black single dad in his late 40s, kept his eyes on the road, his deep brown hands steady on the wheel. 22 years as a State Department interpreter had taught him when silence served better. He knew exactly who Victoria Langford was. Demanding, brilliant. The kind of CEO who saw drivers as furniture. His phone showed a text from Emma. "Dad, biochem exam killed me." His daughter, the future doctor, a black girl from the South Side, now grinding her way through Northwestern Medical School, cost $73,000 per year. His driving salary covered it barely if he took every shift. The State Department pension helped, though it was less than hoped after 2018 budget cuts gutted diplomatic services. Translation technology, they'd claimed, would handle routine work. It couldn't, but by then his entire division was eliminated. Sarah, his wife of 20 years, had died 3 months before the layoffs, medical bills taking their house, and leaving him a widowed black father with a determined teenage girl and a stack of debt. Emma had been 15, determined to become an oncologist. So Daniel sold the Georgetown house, moved to Evanston, and learned that his credentials qualified him to drive other people to their meetings. The pride stung, but Emma's tuition cleared. The privacy glass slid down. The heat's uneven. Fix it. Daniel adjusted the climate zones. The glass went back up. He'd driven worse clients. The job required invisibility, and Daniel had learned to become a ghost. The light changed. Michigan Avenue stretched ahead, treacherous with snow. Daniel had driven through worse: Sarajevo winters, Islamabad monsoons, Moscow at -40. His phone lit up from the dispatcher. "Mercer, client is high priority. Whatever she needs, make it happen." Daniel knew the morning's news, the Tanabe-Rallo partnership. He'd even skimmed the terms on Bloomberg, recognizing the delicate balance of Japanese corporate hierarchy meeting Indian legal precision. He knew exactly what linguistic expertise Victoria needed and knew she'd never ask her driver, especially a black man in a cheap dark suit who read, at a glance, as help and nothing more. Victoria made 6 more calls. Each ended worse than the last. University language departments couldn't help. The consulate was committed elsewhere. Even video interpretation services were down because of the storm. 53 minutes. Her phone rang. Hiroshi Tanabe himself. "Miss Langford," his voice came, formal, questioning. "Are you prepared?" "Our team is ready," Victoria said steadily. "And the translation services? Everything is arranged." It wasn't, but she had 51 minutes. After the call, her head fell back. Through the window, Navy Pier's Ferris wheel sat motionless. She thought about calling her mother. Helen would know what to do, but asking for help meant admitting weakness. The privacy glass slid down. "Madam, which languages do you need?" Victoria's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. His eyes were gray, calm, with the kind of steadiness that came from seeing too much of the world. "For your meeting," he said. I couldn't help overhearing. "You need interpretation services." "Which languages?" The audacity of it. A driver inserting himself into her business crisis. "That's not your concern," Victoria said. "Watch the road." "Japanese," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Technical terminology, corporate hierarchy context. And Hindi, legal register, probably contract law specifically." Victoria stared at him. "How do you?" "Also," he said, still driving, eyes forward, "you'll need someone who understands the cultural dynamics when a Tokyo-based Zaibatsu negotiates with a Mumbai legal team. The hierarchy implications alone could sink the deal if the interpretation doesn't capture the appropriate level of deference." The car had gone very quiet. "You are?" Victoria asked. "Daniel Mercer, ma'am, your driver." He paused. "And formerly senior diplomatic interpreter, U.S. Department of State. 22 years, 9 languages, including Japanese and Hindi." Victoria's phone rang again. She ignored it. "You're a driver," she said slowly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm also fluent in Japanese, Mandarin, Hindi, Arabic, Russian, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. I hold a doctorate in international relations from Georgetown and a master's in applied linguistics from Harvard. I've interpreted for 3 presidents, 2 G7 summits, and the Okinawa base negotiations in 2015. The phone stopped ringing, started again. "If you're all that," Victoria said, "why are you driving my car?" "Because doctoral degrees don't pay medical school tuition," Daniel said simply, "and I have a daughter at Northwestern who's going to be an oncologist." Victoria's phone lit up again, Tanabe calling back. She looked at the driver, Daniel Mercer, apparently, and made a calculation that would have horrified her risk management team. "Can you actually do this?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. The liability language is extremely technical. Patent law, international jurisdictional questions, force majeure clauses specific to quantum computing technology. I interpreted the Tokyo Intellectual Property Summit in 2014, Daniel said. I'm familiar with the terminology." Victoria answered the phone. Mr. Tanabe, my apologies for the delay. May I put you on speaker? She pressed the button before he could answer. Mr. Tanabe, this is Daniel Mercer. I'll be facilitating our discussions today. I wanted to confirm the parameters of Clause 17 before your arrival. And then he spoke in Japanese, fluid, formal for a while, with the exact level of respect appropriate when addressing a senior executive of a major corporation. Victoria didn't speak Japanese, but she heard Tanabe's tone change, warming slightly. Surprised but pleased. Daniel switched to Hindi, presumably speaking to Anika Rallo, and Victoria heard a woman's laugh on the other end. Miss Rallo says, Daniel translated, shifting back to English, the contract language in Section 7 is too aggressive. She's concerned it reads as if Nordic Core is dictating terms rather than proposing partnership. It's standard liability protection, Victoria said. Daniel spoke again in Hindi, listened, then switched to Japanese. Mr. Tanabe suggests, he said to Victoria, that the word standard implies Nordic Core views Tanabe Industries as a standard client. He recommends reframing the language to reflect the unique nature of this partnership. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Not just the words, the understanding beneath them. What do you suggest? She asked. Daniel pulled the car into Nordic Core's underground parking garage, the fluorescent lights harsh after the snow-dimmed daylight. Tell them about your father, he said quietly. What? Your father was an engineer who helped develop early microprocessor architecture. I read the Forbes profile. Tell Mr. Tanabe about how your father's work was built on collaboration with Sony's research team in the 1980s. Make this about legacy, not liability. Victoria opened her mouth, closed it. Daniel was already speaking in Japanese again, and she heard Tanabe respond with what sounded like genuine interest. Mr. Tanabe says his father worked on that same project, Daniel translated. He remembers your father's name from the technical papers. Victoria's throat felt tight. She'd been so focused on the contract language, the liability caps, the intellectual property protections that she'd forgotten the actual humans on the other end of the deal. Tell him, she said slowly, that this partnership honors both our father's belief that technology should bridge gaps, not create them. Daniel translated. Tanabe responded. And this time Victoria heard warmth in his voice, even without understanding the words. He says, Daniel said, that he looks forward to discussing this in person. In 40 minutes, the call ended. Victoria sat in the now parked car, looking at the back of Daniel Mercer's head, the close-cropped gray curls, the straight posture of someone who'd stood in rooms where words could start or prevent wars. The deep brown skin at the nape of his neck contrasted with the white collar of his shirt. Why didn't you say anything before? She asked. You didn't ask, ma'am. I raised the privacy glass. Yes, ma'am. The shame hit her like cold water. I called you just a driver. Yes, ma'am. Victoria gathered her briefcase, her tablet, her phone. When she stepped out of the car, Daniel was already there, holding an umbrella against the snow that somehow found its way even into the covered garage. I need you in that meeting, she said. I assumed, ma'am. And after that, we need to talk about why someone with your credentials is driving a car instead of working in diplomatic relations. Budget cuts, ma'am. The State Department eliminated my entire division in 2018. Translation software was supposed to replace us. Victoria thought about her own company's AI initiatives, the machine learning algorithms that were supposed to revolutionize everything. Did it work, she asked. The software? No, ma'am. But by the time they realized that, they'd already spent the budget. They walked toward the private elevator that went directly to the executive floor. In the polished steel doors, Victoria caught sight of them together, her in her $3,000 suit, him in the standard driver's uniform of dark suit and tie. A black man in a driver's cap beside a white CEO in heels and silk, a picture every corporate building in America seemed to recognize. I'm sorry, she said. For what, ma'am? For treating you like furniture. Daniel pressed the button for the 47th floor. You're not the first, ma'am. Won't be the last. That's not an excuse. No, ma'am, but it's reality. The elevator rose. Victoria texted Marcus. Found one. The executive floor looked like a design magazine. Glass walls, standing desks, skyline views now obscured by white. Marcus met them, expression hovering between panic and professionalism. Victoria, the board is waiting. Tanabe just landed and we don't have. He stopped, looking at Daniel. Who's this? Daniel Mercer, our interpreter. From which agency? He was driving my car and he has more international negotiation experience than everyone here combined. Get him a badge and brief him. Victoria's office was minimalist, glass desk, 2 chairs, leather sofa, 3 items on the walls, her MBA diploma, a photo with the governor, and a framed note from her father. Trust the math, but remember the humans. She'd forgotten that lately. Her mother called from Scottsdale. Mom, this isn't... Marcus called, said you're having trouble. It's handled, is it? You've been so busy being brilliant that you forgot to be human. That's not fair, isn't it? Honey, you're so determined not to need anyone that you treat people like chess pieces. Your father never did that. Victoria looked at the framed note. I know, power isn't standing on top of people. It's lifting them up with you. Try remembering. The call ended. Marcus appeared. Victoria, they're ready. Send Daniel in first. I need 5 minutes. Daniel Mercer entered like someone used to rooms where every word mattered. No fidgeting, no gawking. He waited. Sit, Victoria said. He sat. This deal represents 18 months of work. If it fails, Nordic Core loses everything. I'm trusting you based on a 3-minute conversation. Yes, ma'am. Why should I? Daniel pulled out his phone, opened photos. Him between 2 men signing documents, flags behind them. American, Chinese, Japanese. Trans-Pacific Partnership 2016. IP protection clauses. Next photo. Daniel in military uniform, younger, outside a bunker. Sarajevo, then Northern Balkans conflict interpretation. Another. Daniel shaking hands with a woman in a sari. Indian Commerce Minister 2013, Technology Transfer and Patent Protection. A dozen more images, each a window into a career Victoria had completely misjudged. The State Department doesn't give commendations easily. He showed a certificate. I have 3. 2 for preventing diplomatic incidents, 1 for identifying security risks through linguistic analysis. He put the phone away. You should trust me because I've spent 22 years making sure powerful people actually understand each other. And I've never failed. Victoria looked at him, really looked for the first time. A black man whose whole life had been about making other people's words land safely, now sitting here asking for nothing. What happened? How do you go from presidential commendations to driving priorities? My wife got sick, medical bills took everything, my daughter got into medical school. The State Department eliminated my position. I chose my daughter's future over my pride. You could have found other interpretation work. I tried. AI translation convinced companies they don't need humans. Organizations that do hire want people without government baggage. Apparently, State Department experience makes you overqualified for everything except driving. That's insane. That's economics. Victoria's phone buzzed. Marcus, Tanabe is 15 minutes out. She stood. After this meeting, we're having a longer conversation about what overqualified actually means. Yes, ma'am. And stop calling me ma'am. It's Victoria. Yes, Miss Langford. Close enough. The conference room was designed for intimidation. Massive windows, a 30-seat table, embedded technology. Victoria had chosen it to remind partners that Nordic Core played big. The board was seated. Chairman Richard Carrill, Patricia Montgomery, James Chen, all skeptical of anything unconventional. They looked at Daniel like a lost delivery driver. Victoria, Richard said, where's the interpreter? Unavailable. This is Daniel Mercer. Credentials? Patricia asked. 22 years senior diplomatic interpreter, U.S. State Department. Presidential summits. G7 negotiations. Okinawa base agreements. 9 languages, including Japanese and Hindi. Doctorate in International Relations from Georgetown. Master's in Applied Linguistics from Harvard. Silence. He's your driver. James said slowly. He's the most qualified person in Chicago for this negotiation. Unless you want to explain to shareholders why we lost $1.2 billion because we were too proud to accept help, we move forward. Richard looked at Daniel. You really interpreted for presidents? 3 of them. Though confidentiality agreements prevent specifics. Patricia laughed. I like him. Good, Victoria said. Tanabe's arrival was precisely choreographed. Marcus met them in the lobby and escorted them through glass hallways where every Nordic employee had been instructed to look busy but not intrusive. Hiroshi Tanabe was 63, silver-haired, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd built a manufacturing empire from his father's machine shop. Enika Rao was 48, sharp-eyed, wearing a sari in deep blue silk. They brought 4 assistants, 2 lawyers, and an air of polite skepticism. Daniel greeted them in the hallway before they reached the conference room. He bowed to Tanabe, not too deep, which would have been obsequious, not too shallow, which would have been insulting. Exactly the angle appropriate when a professional addresses a senior executive of a zaibatsu. He spoke in Japanese, and Victoria saw Tanabe's expression shift from neutral to surprised to genuinely pleased. Then Daniel turned to Anika Rao and spoke in Hindi, and she responded with something that made her laugh. Miss Rao says, Daniel translated, that she's relieved to work with someone who understands that Mumbai's legal tradition is not the same as Delhi's. She was concerned the interpretation would be too generalized. Tell her, Victoria said, that we've brought in the best specifically because we understand how important precision is in this partnership. The conference room felt different with Tanabe and Rao present, more balanced, as if the power dynamic Victoria had tried to establish meant less than the actual conversation. Daniel sat between the delegations, not at the head, a facilitator, not a participant. Before we begin, he said, Mr. Tanabe has asked if he might share a story. Daniel translated as Tanabe spoke about his father, who'd worked on early semiconductor technology in the 1980s, how he'd collaborated with American engineers, sharing research despite corporate competition, believing technology belonged to humanity. My father believed the best innovations came from bridging gaps, not building walls. When I saw Nordic's proposal, I thought of him. Victoria felt something loosen. My father was one of those American engineers, she said, Richard Langford. He worked on microprocessor architecture. Tanabe's eyes widened. He spoke rapidly in Japanese. Mr. Tanabe remembers your father's papers, Daniel said. He says they were foundational to his own education. He's honored to continue that legacy of collaboration. The meeting transformed after that. What Victoria had planned as a contract negotiation became something closer to a conversation between people who understood they were building something together. Daniel didn't just translate words. He translated context, intention, cultural nuance. When Anika Ra'alo questioned the liability language in Clause 17, Daniel didn't just convert her Hindi into English. He explained the underlying concern about how Indian courts would interpret the force majeure provisions. When Tanabe suggested modifications to the IP sharing arrangements, Daniel captured not just the suggestion, but the implicit respect it showed for Nordicor's proprietary research. 3 hours in, they broke for lunch. The catering team brought in Japanese and Indian food alongside American options, a detail Marcus had somehow managed despite the chaos. Victoria found Daniel by the windows, looking out at the snow that had finally started to ease. You're not just interpreting, she said. You're negotiating. I'm facilitating communication, Daniel corrected. There's a difference. Mr. Tanabe wants this deal. Miss Rallo wants this deal. You want this deal. But you're all speaking different languages. And I don't just mean Japanese and Hindi. I mean the language of corporate honor versus legal precision versus technological innovation. They taught you that at Georgetown? They taught me the theory at Georgetown, Daniel said. I learned the practice in rooms where mistakes could start wars. This isn't war. No, Daniel agreed. But it's important, and the principles are the same. Understand what people actually mean, not just what they're saying. Find the common ground. Build bridges instead of walls. Victoria thought about the privacy glass in the car. I built a wall today. Yes, Daniel said, you did. I'm sorry, you said that already. I'm saying it again. He looked at her, and she saw something in his expression soften slightly. Apology accepted. Now, let's go save your deal. The afternoon session focused on implementation timelines and integration protocols. This was where the previous negotiations had stalled. Nordicor wanted rapid deployment to beat competitors to market, while Tanabe insisted on thorough testing to protect their manufacturing reputation. Enika Rallo, representing the legal and financial interests, needed guarantees that neither company would be exposed to liability if the aggressive timeline failed. It was a three-way deadlock disguised as collaboration. Daniel listened to all three positions, then spoke quietly in Japanese to Tanabe. Tanabe responded with what sounded like a question. Daniel switched to Hindi, speaking with Rallo. Then he turned to Victoria. May I suggest something, please? The issue isn't timeline or testing or liability. The issue is trust. Mr. Tanabe needs to trust that Nordic won't sacrifice quality for speed. Miss Rallo needs to trust that both companies will share risk equally. You need to trust that Tanabe's thoroughness won't strangle innovation. And how do we build that trust? Victoria asked. Tell them about kintsugi, Daniel said. Victoria frowned. The Japanese pottery repair technique? Yes. Where broken ceramics are mended with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty instead of trying to hide them. Tell them that this partnership should work the same way. We acknowledge the potential fracture points and make them stronger instead of pretending they don't exist. Victoria looked at Tanabe, then at Rallo. I'm not sure I understand how that applies to contract language. Watch, Daniel said. He spoke in Japanese, explaining the metaphor. Tanabe's expression changed. He sat forward, interested. Daniel switched to Hindi, and Rallo nodded slowly. Mr. Tanabe suggests, Daniel translated, that we create a joint oversight committee not to control, but to communicate. Weekly meetings during the first year of implementation, representatives from both companies, with transparent reporting on both progress and problems. Miss Rallo adds, Daniel continued, that the committee should have binding authority to pause deployment if quality concerns arise, but only with unanimous agreement. It protects Tanabe's reputation while maintaining Nordic's flexibility. Victoria thought about it. That gives them veto power over our timeline. It gives everyone veto power, Daniel corrected, including you. It's not control, it's collaboration. It's also not in the original contract. The original contract, Daniel said gently, was about to fail. Victoria looked at her legal team. Michael Reeves was already typing notes, probably drafting the language for a joint oversight provision. Tell them, Victoria said, that I agree. We'll structure it as a partnership council, equal representation with clear decision-making protocols. We'll make the cracks part of the strength. Tanabe smiled when Daniel translated. He stood, walked around the table, and offered his hand to Victoria. She shook it and felt 18 months of tension finally release. By 7 p.m., they had a memorandum of understanding. Not the final contract that would take lawyers another few weeks to perfect, but a framework both sides could sign. The partnership council provision was there in black and white. So were the revised timelines, the shared liability structures, the IP protections that satisfied both American and Indian legal standards. Tanabe and Rallo signed first, using formal calligraphy pens their assistants provided. Victoria signed last, her signature looking hastily modern next to theirs. When the delegations finally left, promising to return in 2 weeks for the formal signing, Victoria found herself alone in the conference room with Daniel. You saved my company, she said. I clarified communication, Daniel corrected. You built something worth saving. That's generous, considering how I treated you this morning. This morning you were desperate and terrified, Daniel said. People aren't their best selves when they're desperate and terrified. That's still not an excuse. No, he agreed, but it's context. Victoria looked at the signed memorandum on the table, $1.2 billion in partnership value built on a foundation that had almost crumbled because she'd been too proud to ask for help. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "As what?" "Senior Vice President of International Relations. You'd report directly to me. Your job would be to do exactly what you did today. Build bridges, translate not just words, but intentions. Help us navigate the cultural complexities of global partnerships." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "The salary would be commensurate with the role," Victoria continued. "6 figures, full benefits, stock options, enough to cover medical school tuition without working double shifts." "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because you're brilliant at this. Because I need someone who can see what I can't see. Because," Victoria paused, "because my mother reminded me that power isn't about standing on top of other people. It's about lifting them up with you. Your driver's salary is $42,000 a year. I know you're offering me at least 3 times that. I'm offering you what you're worth, which is probably more than 3 times that, but let's start somewhere and negotiate." Daniel looked out at the Chicago skyline. The snow had stopped completely now, and the sunset was painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose that reflected softly off his deep brown skin in the glass. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course, and I need to talk to my daughter. She's the reason I took the driving job. She'd need to be the reason I leave it." "I understand." He turned back to her. "But I want you to understand something, Victoria. I didn't do this for a job offer. I did it because it needed doing, and I could do it. If I'd wanted to leverage this for employment, I would have told you my credentials before we got to your building." "I know," Victoria said. "That's why I want to hire you." Daniel smiled. "A real one this time. Let me talk to Emma. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow." "Fair enough." He headed toward the elevator, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're better at this than you think. You just need to remember that the people around you are assets, not obstacles." After he left, Victoria stayed in the conference room, watching the sunset turn the snow-covered city into something beautiful. Her phone buzzed. Her mother texting. Marcus called. "Said the deal is saved. I assume you remembered the humans." Victoria typed back, "I did. Thank you. Proud of you, honey." Victoria looked at the empty conference room, at the signed memorandum, at her reflection in the darkening windows. She'd spent her entire career trying to do everything herself, build the company, close the deals, prove she didn't need anyone's help. It had made her brilliant and lonely, and so focused on control that she'd almost destroyed the thing she was trying to protect. Her father's note, the one framed in her office, "Trust the math, but remember the humans." She'd been trusting the math for so long that she'd forgotten the second part. Daniel called the next morning from a coffee shop near Northwestern. The low hum of espresso machines blended with muted campus chatter. His deep brown fingers were wrapped around a paper cup as he watched students, some black, some not, rush past on their way to class, and thought about the one whose future he was fighting for. "Emma says I should take the job," he said, "but she has conditions." "Which are, first, that you actually mean it. She's concerned this is guilt masquerading as professional respect." Victoria considered that carefully. "Tell her it's both. I feel guilty about how I treated you, but that's not why I'm offering the position. I'm offering it because what you did yesterday was extraordinary, and Nordic Core needs extraordinary people." "Second condition," Daniel continued, "she wants to meet you. She says anyone who has the power to change her father's life should be willing to look her in the eye and explain why." Victoria smiled. "I like her already." "When?" "Tomorrow, if you're free. She has a break between classes at 2 p.m. I'll be there." "Third condition," Daniel said, and his voice changed. "This one's from me. If I take this job, you don't get to treat anyone else the way you treated me yesterday. Not the janitors, not the interns, not the receptionist. Everyone matters, or this doesn't work." Victoria thought about the executive car service dispatcher, the administrative assistants. She barely noticed the night security guards whose names she'd never bothered to learn. "Agreed," she said. "In fact, I'm adding it to my executive team's performance reviews. How we treat the people who aren't in the boardroom matters as much as quarterly earnings." "Then I accept," Daniel said, with one final request. "Name it. the company car service you use. They underpay their drivers and overwork them. I know because I've been there for 6 months. If you're going to be consistent about this everyone matters philosophy, start there. Consider it done, Victoria said. And Daniel, thank you for yesterday, for today, for reminding me what leadership actually means. You're welcome. Now, about that salary negotiation you mentioned. Victoria laughed. My office Monday morning. Bring your terms. The Monday meeting became the foundation of something larger. Daniel built a team of cultural liaisons and regional specialists who understood that global business required more than contracts. Within 6 months, Nordic expanded into 3 new markets. The Tenabe partnership became their template, transparent, communicative, built on trust instead of control. Victoria learned to recognize talent everywhere. The night janitor, who spoke 6 languages, joined Daniel's team. The receptionist with a philosophy degree started moderating negotiations. A framed photo on Daniel's new desks showed a beautiful black family. Sarah smiling wide, teenage Emma with tight curls and bright eyes, and Daniel in the middle, reminding him every day why he did this work. Results spoke loudly. International revenue doubled. Retention hit record highs. Emma Mercer matched into oncology at Johns Hopkins. She sent Victoria a note. Thank you for seeing what my dad was worth. 2 years later, they stood in the same conference room celebrating Nordic Core Innovation Award. Remember the privacy glass? Daniel asked. Every day, Victoria said. It reminds me that real conversations happen when we remove our barriers. She paused. I donated that car. The new one has no partition. They watched Chicago together, the city that had tested them and given them second chances. Outside, snow fell again, but this time neither saw it as a threat. Just Chicago being beautiful and difficult and worth navigating together. The barriers between them, glass partitions, assumptions, walls built from pride and fear, finally permanently gone.